Hello and welcome to Beyond the Display. My name is Shelby Dains. I'm a collections specialist at the Sullenberger Aviation Museum, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina. Today I'm going to be talking to you about using museum collections to inspire future aviators. So before we start, I wanted to kind of contextualize the transformation my museum has been through over the past 30 years. This is a visual of where we started at our very earliest history in the early 90s or early to late 90s. And then this is where we are today, a professional cultural organization that is a Smithsonian affiliate and takes really seriously this job of educating the public. This is a timeline of the transformation that we've been on since our inception in the early 90s. I won't go through every point on this flow chart, but I did want to touch on a few really important dates. So something that's really important to understanding our collecting process is knowing that in 2012, we went through a professionalization process in which we transitioned from an aviation enthusiast-led organization to an organization that is led by people who are very familiar with the museum world and what that entails and that responsibility. So 2012 is the first time when we really hired somebody that had formal training in the processes that it takes to make a great museum and what it takes to be a historian. Another important date that I wanted to touch on is 2019 to 2024. So this is when we closed and did a master planning phase in which we now have reopened. We reopened in summer 2024 with a brand new campus that you can see right here. This is us in 2025. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see that original hangar building from the first picture I showed, but you can also see our outdoor gallery, our new main gallery that you saw a picture of just a moment ago. And this, I think, visually really represents the transformation that we've gone on from a really small grassroots organization to a very respected cultural organization. And this is to really contextualize how we got to a place where we are collecting purposefully and how that leads to great storytelling. So I want to talk about our prior collecting habits. Like I mentioned, when we first began, we were enthusiast-led, and those were the people that were collecting all the great artifacts that we have today. They really laid the foundation for our collections. However, they didn't really have any formal training, and so they were really collecting what was interesting to them and what was available to them, and they really didn't have the tools to think about how are these artifacts going to be used in storytelling and really what constitutes the best storytelling practices. This is completely different today. All of our artifact and collecting management goes through our collections manager, and every time that we are accessioning something into our collection, she is evaluating the historical and institutional relevance of that artifact before we accept it into the collection. She is also making sure that these things that are being accepted are meeting our collecting goals and standards and that we have the means to take care of them. This means asking questions that we didn't ask before. We're asking questions like, who was this item used by? Was it connected to any significant events or people? We're also asking questions like, do we have duplicates of this item? Or does this item tell a story that we are already telling in our galleries already? And so it's not really relevant for us to have this in our collections and take on the responsibility of caring for this artifact. And when we do all these and we are selective about our collecting, it really makes for great storytelling because we can really cultivate the stories and artifacts that we have in our collection and make sure that we're doing the best job. Another way that we really make sure that we're using our collection to tell great stories is by filling in the gaps. So this year, my team, the collections team at the museum, did a gap analysis, which is essentially a self-evaluation of all of our exhibits to make sure to talk about what stories did we tell really well in this iteration of the museum that came out in 2024, but what stories were we missing out on the first time that we maybe didn't have the resources to tell the first time? And so this really leads us on avenues where we know what kind of artifacts we're looking for to tell these new stories that we want to touch on, what research avenues we need to go on to make sure that we are keeping up with changing paradigms in the museum industry. And also it really just allows us to tell these really great stories and continue to tell great stories into the future. And that begs the question, how are we putting these great stories to use? So, one of the ways that we put great stories to use is by empowering young people to see themselves in aviation careers. And one of the ways that we do this is by breaking down the limitations that they come to us with. So, oftentimes we see a couple of different limitations that people will come to us with, and there are different ways that we try and break down these limitations. So, the first one that we often see is a personal limitation. This is the idea that I'm not worthy to be in the aviation industry, or maybe they're not interested in being in the aviation industry. And one way that we would break down this limitation is to engage them in interesting stories and projects to show them that learning about aviation is fun and interesting and also accessible to them. Another one that people often come to us with is a sociocultural limitation. I'm not from the right background to be in this career. Maybe they don't or have never seen somebody from their background represented in this career. And this is where we use our exhibits and our industry partners to show them that there are people like them who are already working in the aviation industry, breaking down those barriers so they can see people like them in that career currently. Another one that people often come to us with is an awareness limitation. They may not know at all what is available right here at home in North Carolina. So we try and use our programming and career resources and exhibits to expose them to the careers that are close to home. Some of the ways that we do this with our programming is with engaging with industry professionals. So on the left, you can see one of our summer camps. We had firefighters from Charlotte Douglas International come out and talk to them about what it's like to be a firefighter at the airport. So we love to have industry professionals come out and interact with our guests in real life. When we can't have industry professionals actually come to us in person, we like to use resources like oral histories. So on the right, you'll see former U.S. Naval Aviator John Leanhout standing next to an interactive that is in our galleries right now. And this interactive uses interviews that John gave talking about his experience in the Gulf Wars of the early 1990s. Another way we like to do this is by using current events and people displayed in our galleries. I think this is a really great way that we combat the idea that museums only talk about old, dead people, that they're boring and dusty. So we use stories that are currently developing and that we will continue to update into the future. So one of those is the Future Aircraft of Today display that we have in our galleries, and it talks about technologies that are being innovated currently right now that are likely going to be the future of the aviation industry. Another way that we do this is with our Meet the Carolinas Aerospace Interactive, which is also in our galleries. And so this is a collection of interviews that we did with people that work in the Carolinas aerospace community, all the way from military aviators to leadership positions at CLT. We have aircraft technicians, people that want to be commercial pilots but are student pilots right now. We show the diversity that is present in the aerospace community in the Carolinas just to expose people to what is available to them. Another way we really like to target young people is by role-playing real aviation careers. So this is when we take a group of young people that come to us for programming, and we either assign them or allow them to choose a real-life aviation career. They then will research that career and what it means to be in that career. This might be doing online research, or it might be going into our galleries to use that previous exhibit that I just talked about to see what it's like to work in that career. We would then group them all together, and everybody would have a different career that they have chosen or been assigned, and they would work together to solve a problem. So one that we often do is designing an airport. And within that, they would be asked questions like, how can the airport you're designing establish more efficient flight paths? And that really engages their critical thinking skills, and it challenges them to develop the skills that they would need to really be in that career. But I think most importantly, it allows them to see themselves in this career, which I think is just a huge step in inspiring them and telling them that, yes, you can do this and you do have the tools available to you and the resources to make this happen. The last section that we're going to talk about is inclusive curation and practice. I think this is very important to us at the museum, and I think that we really embody or try to embody in all of our practices inclusive curation. And I think we need to talk about, before we get into this, what it means to be inclusive. So at SAM, what it means to be inclusive in our curation practices is having something that represents everybody that's walking in our doors. That means that we have stories about people from different races, from different genders, and from different backgrounds. But I also think that diversity to us means highlighting the diversity of careers that are present in the aviation industry, and also the diversity in technology that is present in the aviation industry. And this is one of our goals that we have, so that we make sure when somebody walks through our doors that they have something that they can relate to and find interesting, even if they may not think that before they came to visit us that they were interested in aviation at all. So the next section is called Make the Call. And to talk about what I like to call making the call, I want to highlight a case study on Philip Wood. So when we were curating the Vietnam section at our museum, and this is a display that you can currently see if you visit us and go to our Vietnam section, we got to the end of the curation process and we realized that the displays were very homogenous. They really only talked about white males who were aviators, and we didn't have really any diversity. And so we were tasked, or I was tasked specifically with trying to put more diverse stories in this section. And as I was researching that, I immediately came to this roadblock that during the Vietnam War, there were not very many non-white pilots. So that makes an even smaller group of people that I'm targeting. And so I also wanted somebody who flew a helicopter that was in our collection. This is UH-1 Huey, which we have in our collection. And I also wanted somebody from the Carolinas because we do target Carolinas aviation history. So that was even smaller pools of people. And I was like, how am I going to find these people? So I started working through this informal network of Black Vietnam veterans. And I was on the phone every day calling people. I was advocating my cause to them. I was making it known what I was doing and why, and that I really wanted to be one of the only museums to touch on this history of Black helicopter pilots that served during the Vietnam War. And eventually I had a breakthrough where I was able to connect with Philip Wood, and he had a very interesting story about overcoming racial barriers. And he also had pictures to go with it. And so we were able to make this display when at many points during this process, we thought that this would never come to fruition. So that's why I like to call this section Making the Call, because I think that one of the best ways that we can overcome archival silences is through human connection. I think that it's a really important way to find curatorial leads that represent these marginalized communities, but just by reaching out to people, not being afraid, cold calling them, and just really advocating for your cause and telling them what you're doing and why it matters for them to participate in that. Another really important thing I think that we do well at our museum is explaining the gap. So when people come to us and they look at our exhibits, we want them to know why certain people might be not represented as well as we would like. And this is not because the museum is avoiding highlighting these people, but it's really because exclusionary practices were real, meaning that some stories and histories that we cover do not include certain groups purely because they were prevented from participating in that history. And instead of avoiding those hard conversations, we use these topics to discuss why certain groups were excluded or underrepresented. And one of the ways that we do this is in our Aviation Society exhibit. So this is a case study of two displays that you can find in that exhibit currently. One is the WASP. The WASP were a group of civilian women during World War II who flew planes for the military. And we cover a vast array of WASPs that were from North Carolina, and all of those were white, college-age, affluent women. And so that begs the question, were women of color accepted into the WASP program? Well, yes, they were. And we provide two examples of women of color that were accepted into the WASP program. But we also talk about Janet Bragg, who was an African-American woman who applied to the WASP program and was denied on the basis of her race, and how she went on to create a group for Black aviators that was very successful. But I think recognizing the barriers that were put in place to people that were not white or affluent or didn't come from the correct background, and why they were excluded from this very important historical program. Another one that we like to touch on is a current statistic, or relatively current. We have a display about female fighter pilots, but we also like to recognize that only 6.5% of pilots in the US Air Force in 2020 were women. So even though we are highlighting these histories of women that served, it really is in reality, a very small percentage of the people that are currently in the US Air Force, only three of those being fighter pilots themselves. So as we come to conclusion, I wanted to touch on our mission to inspire, educate, and elevate. And I think that when we are allowing these future aviators, these young people, to see themselves in these positions, when we use inclusive curation practices to do so, we are not only hitting on our mission, we are also influencing the future of aviation. And with that being said, that leads me to the Q&A portion. I also put up a QR code if you'd like to connect with myself in the museum. You can find various links in there. Do I go to the QA section to get questions, or will there be somebody moderating to give me the questions themselves? Joseph, do you mind chiming in? I'm not sure where I'm supposed to see the questions, if there are any at this point.
Hello, everybody. So I will moderate and I'll stay on screen with you here in case any questions come in. I don't see anything yet, but we'll give it a few minutes.
Okay, no worries. I'm happy to stick around.
Also, for those who don't know me, I'm the one running everything in the background here. I'm Joseph Lara. I'm the founder and CEO of Lara Marketing and Events, and we're the actual producers of this year's Women in Aviation Global Virtual Summit, and we are ecstatic to be a part of this. We did all the video editing, especially on the intro videos and all the break videos and things that you've seen. And I am, like I said, I'm the guy kind of running the back end here, making sure everything goes as smooth as we can kind of get it.
Well, thank you for jumping in. I actually do see the questions now. I think Don has asked, for people who cannot make it to the museum, are parts of the museum exhibits online? I know many museums have parts of their or whole exhibits online. At this time, we do have pictures of our aircraft online. Actually, that's a project that I've been working on for the past year, is getting better pictures of our aircraft online. I think for us, it's important to remember that even though we've been around for 30 years, we were closed for a long while, especially during those COVID years. So we've only been operating really at full capacity, actually for a couple months since we just opened our historic hangar. But as an institution, we've only been reopened for just over a year. So we don't have any parts of our museum exhibits online yet, but that could be a possibility. But I think also you can, we do important outreach on our social media. So that's something my team and I participate in. We try to get really engaging historical stories up online. We have a couple articles that you can see online that touch on parts of our exhibit. You can check us out on Instagram and Facebook, which is in that QR code that I shared at the end of my presentation. That you can check out parts of our exhibit that we feature on social media, just as outreach and trying to educate and get people interested in the things that we are doing. So thank you, Don, for that question.
Yeah, so we have a question from the Q&A. Actually, we have a great question. So is there a particular topic or collection that you find students are most interested and engaged in?
I think that students are really interested and engaged when they get to see things happen in real life. So I think that anytime an industry professional can come out and talk to them firsthand is what really gets kids excited. I also think that, like I talked about in my presentation, something that we do really well is talking about not just historical aviators, but historical aviators that are still currently in the industry and technologies that are still currently being innovated. And I think kids are really interested when they come to the museum and see that we have things that are current and not, 20, 30, 50 years old. In fact, one of my coworkers one time was standing in front of the Meet the Carolinas aerospace industry display in the gallery, and there was a child that was viewing that, and they said, "These people are still alive?" And she said, "Yeah, we did these interviews a year ago. These people are still working in the jobs that they are talking to you about right now." So it's always great to expose them to things careers that will still be around and technologies that will still be innovated by the time that they get to a place where they're entering the career field.
Excellent. Do we have any other questions from the audience? All right. So before we end, I will share a really funny story with you. Over the summer, we took our kids to a science museum, and in the one of the exhibits was on personal computing, and they actually had stuff that I used when I was younger, and my kids were like, "Wait a minute, you actually used that? Like a mouse with a wire? Like you used, an old Commodore?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's how we learned." Um, so
Yeah.
anyway, we actually do have one more question from Dawn. So, what is the museum's connection to Captain Sully Sullenberger?
Yeah, so Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger is the pilot that our museum is named after. The professionalization process that I talked about in 2011 was largely centered around our museum receiving the Miracle on the Hudson aircraft, which is the actual Airbus A320 that Captain Sullenberger and First Officer Jeffrey Skiles piloted and landed on the Hudson River on January 15th, 2009. After the NTSB was done with their investigation, which took place in New Jersey, that aircraft was trucked in different parts all the way down to North Carolina. It was an 8-day process. So we've had that aircraft since 2011, and that has been open to the public for numerous years. In fact, in 2024, when the museum reopened after being closed for a while, that was when the Airbus A320, what we call the Miracle on the Hudson aircraft, was put into its permanent home in our main gallery. So if you come to us, we have an entire exhibit focused on the Miracle on the Hudson, Captain Sullenberger, the passengers, the evacuations. We have the aircraft. We have donations from passengers and the crew and other emergency workers that were involved in that incident. So that is a main offering that we have at the Sullenberger Aviation Museum. In addition to all of our other aircraft, we have, I think, close to 40 aircraft that are available, many of them focusing on our mission to tell histories of Carolina's aviators. And to us, that is a Carolina's aviation story, because that aircraft that day was actually on its way to Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Many people don't know that because it only made it about 3 minutes into its journey. But yeah, it is now in our possession. We take really great care of it, and we love telling that story.
Excellent. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'll give everybody one last opportunity to ask a question. Or we can go to a short break. So we'll give it just a minute. All right. So we are going to go to. Whoa. Okay.
I think one just came.
Another question. Long question. So does your museum collaborate with other museums to put on exhibitions?
I don't know if that's something. This definitely collaboration is something that we're open to, but it would require more in-depth conversation. And I think if you'd like to reach out to us about any collaborations, I encourage you to visit our website, which if you Google Sullenberger Aviation Museum is going to be probably the first result. that you have. And yeah, just reach out to us. I think the work that you're doing is really interesting.
All right, so we are going to go now to a short break, and then we will be back in a few minutes with intro to stress management in aviation with Shannon Torres.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thank you
so much.
guys. Thanks, everyone.